We have a few questions coming up. The first question is, do you have any feedback from Western mathematics historians? What was their reaction? Bhaskar, you want to take it? And yeah, Professor Kak, please go ahead.
Yeah, not just this question, but perhaps put
Sure.
it in a perspective. You know, you narrated the story of Mary Boole, her
Right.
famous 1898 essay, I think it was, where she says how Boole and De Morgan and Babbage, who are considered the parents of modern computer science, they really learned from George Everest. And George Everest was the Surveyor General of India. And he used to go back to London from time to time. And Mary Boole said that these guys learned Indian Navya Nyaya, which has all the mathematical logic, which was done 1,000 years earlier in Bengal and Bihar. And so all this stuff is in the literature. And I can tell you personally, Donald Knuth, you know, the granddaddy of modern computer science, he wrote to me on several occasions, and he wanted to find out, you know, what had happened in Indian sciences, and he has included that in the revisions of his books. So this stuff is generally available in various books by the best, the greatest scholars in the West. The problem is when books are written for the general public, or histories are written for school children or for college people, for various reasons outside of scientific ones, and that's where hegemony and control come in. The Indian contributions have been erased. So Western scholars are totally in agreement with all of this. They know it. It's a part of the general scholarship river that you have. The problem is that we haven't had books for the general public in India, especially, and in the West also, because people have to simplify matters. And a Western readership the author would say, well, why do we have to tell them about Bodhayana or about Panini? It's too complicated. So leave these names out. They're already familiar with the Greek authors. So let's just confine ourselves to that. The problem is that Indians haven't done the lifting that is necessary. And partly because we haven't had a healthy ecosystem where there was publishing which accompanied the work that was being done, because there's a lot of work that goes on there. What you write for a scholarly journal is not quite the same what the effort that goes into writing a book and producing it in a fashion which is attractive. So this is just the background that, in my view, this is all a part of stuff that all scholars accept. You know, there's no dispute.
Yeah, and I may want to add here one small thing to the question that we just saw. That's in I have also it's very risky for Western mathematicians to go against the dominant narrative. So yeah, if for example, if someone mentions that, okay, the Greek manuscripts, they came all the way from Arabia, from Persia. They were actually translations from Arabic and from Persia, which actually were landed there about 1,000 years after the supposed creation in Greece, in ancient Greece. Does that not ring any alarm bells to you? So, but no, it does not, because for the West, it's like a very a convenient way of maintaining the status quo, that everything comes from Greece. So so it's so for as far as this book is concerned, I did not really I tried to contact some Western professors of mathematics and historians, but unfortunately I really did not get any response from them, or any interest for following this up further. uh, for example, yeah, I think this is what I would just mention.
But Bhaskar, when it comes to Pythagoras theorem and Bodhayana, not
Yeah.
only do you have the Saint Andrews, history of Indian mathematics thing, where where the correct chronology is given. But look at Manjul Bhargava, who's a Fields medalist. He's written on it many, many times. That Baudhayana was several centuries prior to Pythagoras. So, and he's a leading mathematician in the world right now. So I think my own assessment. Now, of course, in when it comes to research, there's a lot of ground which is always contested, because depending upon which lens you are looking at through at certain events, you can say, hey, we're not quite sure. Maybe there was also a contribution from this side or from that side, which is perfectly fine. We are all in it searching for the truth, right? But then with all the facts that there are, you can make some general sweeping or broad statements, which is what a book such as The Imperishable Seed is all about. What is the broad story? Now, when you're doing a broad story, you cannot always take into consideration every infinitesimal detail. And that could be interesting as well. And that is the domain of the research article. And certainly you, Bhaskar, I'm quite sure, want as much of research being done into any of the contested questions, because the objective is the truth. And the truth to the extent that we can approach it, because the past is gone, but there are certain traces, textual and others, and there is forensics required, as Sankrant was saying. And so what can be said about the past which makes the most sense? That is the question.
I think, one of the interesting things that Bhaskar also raised that I found useful was that, in the section on why history was erased, what we see is that often the so-called mainstream accounts are built on this stack of history, which the foundations themselves are very weak. For instance, one of the most influential books on the history of India was James Mill's, History of India. And when you look at the way he marshals evidence and the way he chooses to take evidence or discard evidence, so he takes very flimsy quote facts on which he bases his arguments. For instance, one of the things, this is a quote from the book, where it says, what the Hindus are saying is nonsense because they're coming with a date so ancient as to be entirely inconsistent with the chronology of the Hebrew scriptures, right? So if you believe that the world was, 4,000 years old or 6,000 years old, then of course the Hindu dates are absurd, and they are absurd to people who are believing in the gospel truth of the gospel, right? So the one side is the truth of the gospel, which cannot be challenged, which is gospel truth, and the other side is these absurd Hindus that are saying the earth is millions, maybe even 1 billion years old, right? So that's the kind of thing that, and then they say, of course we know that like the Greeks have superior intellect and the Hindus are barbarian, and that's the evidence that is used to dismiss one part of history and take the other thing as true. So it rests contemporary history, especially if you start digging back history of science and mathematics. The primary sources are very tenuous, and a lot of them actually make this big round trip through Arabs, right? So the story goes that, well, it's all Greek knowledge. And how do we know it's Greek knowledge? Well, the Arabs have translated all this Greek knowledge and kept and preserved it. And now we are translating it back, and now we are claiming that it's Greek knowledge. Well, that's not really a primary source. That's happening 1,000 years after when you're claiming it's happening. And on top of that, the Arabs were not in the business of just preserving Greek knowledge. I mean, they were in the business of learning things. They added a lot of their own learning and everything else. And so the basis on which a lot of the assertions are made need to be challenged. And this is where I find that Bhaskar's book is so central and so interesting in the way all these things are put together. Because once you start peeling the layers of the onions, you see that it actually is not resting on anything. It's all empty space inside it. And as we start pulling the foundations of this, I think this structure of the contemporary narratives of history are bound to collapse, and open-minded Western scholars, and I have interacted with some of them, have very much so. They are open, and they're starting to say, well, this is what the evidence actually says. C.K. Raju had put this challenge out there for an award for anybody who can prove that Euclid actually existed and is real. But you can ask any school child going in India, forget the West, and they'll say, of course Euclid existed. He's written a whole book, and that's what we study in geometry, right? And this very notion of proof. And I'm probably going to leave this one topic, which I think is very interesting and central. There was a thread out on Twitter which says, well, the Indians might have figured out the theorem, but Pythagoras is really the one who put together the proof. So what would you say, Bhaskar, about this notion of proof in India? And did we just imagine things out of thin air? Kind of the Ramanuja story also adds to that, or did we actually have this notion of proof?
So obviously there was a notion of proof in Hindu mathematics. So there was this, it was called, I think, Yukti or Upapatti, it was called, and it was like, and Bhaskara mentions it, for example. Bhaskara too mentions it. The different reasons, like the importance of a proof. And there is. It's just that the Sanskrit texts, they were written in. They have different styles of writing. So if you look at, for example, Aryabhatiya from Aryabhata, it's just a sequence of sutras. It's meant for the knowledgeable person. So in there you cannot expect to find proofs. So and the proofs are given in detailed commentaries by the disciples of these masters. So Aryabhatiya Bhashya, for example, it's given there. So this is one thing. And secondly, you just mentioned about like Pythagoras. Somebody mentioned that Pythagoras has given the proof. Well, if you look at the works of Thomas Heath, who is supposed to be considered to be the foremost authority on Greek mathematics, he writes in his book, there is no evidence that Pythagoras discovered the theorem known after his name. So and like at least so this is and then if you also look at yeah, I mean this is what I would just basically say to this, that the notion that there is no proof in Indian mathematics is actually a false one. So I have an entire chapter dedicated to this in the book. So yeah, you can, the further details will be available there. Right now I'm not, I don't remember everything right now, but yeah, you just
well, I think the message we are getting from Bhaskar is read the book. It has all the details, and that's what I would urge all of our viewers to do, and tell your friends. Please definitely go, and it's very important. The book itself is available on the Garuda Books website, on also other major retailers, grpr.in/TIS. It's just a treasure load of knowledge, and it's such an enjoyable read. I encourage everybody to get their own copy, and definitely find to gift your friends. I just saw that Professor Dinesh had also I know he had been going in and out, perhaps there was a bad connection.